Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix, and I'll be reading from Micronation, the novel, Chapter 17, Meeting with the Council. In the end, it was my feckless sense of humor that gave me access to my desired destination, rather than any association with quiescence prow. It was a rather arbitrary decision by Ferret to include me on Hler's ruling council, and once the precedent was set, I was invited to sit on all their meetings. In time, that would give me the information I needed. I looked around the room. The 5 chairs were very plush, with a hastily added 6. The room included the newly created royal crest, with a suitable symbology in deference to my title as regent. The chairs held 4 men and 1 woman. A single servant occasionally came in to restock the buffet and wet bar. Ferret started the meeting. I think we should begin by summarizing the situation to Mr. Art, His Grace. Ferret was American. We didn't do aristocratic titles well. I bore him no ill will for that. Aside from his genetic existence, I bore him no ill will at all. Mr. Ferret looked around the room for consensus and saw that all present looked at him impatiently. Apparently, they had as little love for self-aggrandizing introductions as I did. Good. We would get along famously. He continued as he looked at me. There's a proposal before Hler to roughly increase the size of our nation by 10-fold. One of the island nations that was destroyed a decade ago by rising sea levels is offered to sell us their nation in exchange for full citizenship of all their members. The immediate advantages to this proposal are instant recognition by the UN as an actual state, instead of the sunken ship nonsense the United States continues to use as rationale against us, and an equatorial site to begin eventual construction of a space elevator. The disadvantage is that several other island nations now claim this area as part of their national territory since it's rich in natural resources. By taking it into our territory, there's a good chance that we could literally plunge our nation into war, which is all the excuse the Russians, Chinese, and possibly the U.S. need to attack us and try and wipe us out. At least that is how the argument have been going back and forth for several days now. I had read the notes, thank you. I could understand formality for some things, but meetings for their own sake just sickened me. How had this man ever made himself a millionaire? Maybe he just got lucky. I looked around the room. I recognized Abraham Bell. He obviously wanted to make the deal with Tuvalu to get Hler access to space. Angel Bright had the bright idea, pun intended, to make a space elevator, and they figured they finally had the material to do that with. They only needed a proper location. Ferret had recused himself from this decision. It didn't take a rocket scientist, no pun intended, to see why. Hler was a patchwork of different interests and alliances. It was a natural magnet for a bunch of rugged individualists who believed that every man could and should be an island. That was fine in practice, but politically speaking, it meant that people were hard to please. Thus, by claiming some frivolous conflict of interest excuse, he removed himself from the equation. In this case, it was because he had a natural interest. If he didn't have a vote, he didn't have to anger anyone. I, on the other hand, was entirely disposable. With Bell and Ferret out of the way, that left the conflict between Gilligan Orocalyptos, Helen Wainwright of Flexitron, and Keggy Devourer of Duoi. I didn't know these three as well as I did Abraham and Ferret, but Hler was a fishbowl, so of course I knew a few things. Gilligan was named after the popular television show of the same name. His parents were rich hippies who thought the idea would be funny. Gilligan hated the name but refused to change it. He was stubborn to a fault, but firmly believed that the ocean held the future for mankind. You would think that he and Abraham might not get along, but in this case it wasn't true. Abraham saw Tuvalu as an even better chance to build up Calypto's assets, since the second artificial island meant much easier expansion of the ocean micronation infrastructure. Hler was getting very expensive to expand. Helen wasn't a stupid woman. She'd been quite attractive in her day, but too much plastic surgery was already starting to take its toll. Flexitron's main focus right now was being a data haven. It had brought a lot of money into Hler, more than the oil even, but a lot of that money would evaporate if half the world went to war with Hler. Conversely, aside from a few minor technical advantages, such as another backup site, her company really only needed one secure location with a government that wasn't breathing down their neck to do the kinds of things that they were making money on. She was adamantly opposed to the Tuvalu idea. Keggy was an enigma. He seemed more like someone you might see hosting a game show than a military contractor. He had all the charm you saw for someone of the upper crust, but his froofy white hair and utterly casual dress style disarmed you. The man looked like he was retired. He acted like he was retired, sprawled all over his chair as if it was giving him a massage, with his feet propped up on the gleaming black electronic display on the table. He had a cunning mind, though, and he also knew that a lot of his contracts came from governments that had started to become threatened by Hler. He was nervous for a guy who wasn't nervous, but he was not as nervous as Helen. They all looked at me expectantly. I wasn't sure if I had the facts right, but I had to start somewhere. I said, right, well, it seems to me that the primary concern here is that you're afraid of making major world powers want to destroy Hler by pressing them too far, right? Helen said, the Russians are just waiting for an excuse. The Chinese and the United States are becoming increasingly nervous. The efforts of the UN are working, but they will take time. What's the rush? Abraham pounded his fist on the table. They are the rush. They're going to attack us sooner or later anyway. We've got a little bubble of freedom here, but every moment that passes is another that some random thing could happen that would cause them to attack us anyway. The only freedom is in space. I looked at Helen. How sure are you that they'll attack Hler if the Tuvalu deal goes through? Very. As I said, the Russians are just looking for an excuse to attack us again. They weren't happy that they lost the last time. All it really takes is the U.S. and China joining them morally, and suddenly we're toast. Well, what governments do we have on our side? Ferret pulled out folders and handed them around the room. Quite a few, actually. India, 73% of the EU, and almost 75% of the other nations in the world back us, being admitted into the General Assembly, at least in theory. The problem is that the Security Council is basically guaranteed to veto it. Abraham shouted. They can't veto it. This isn't some military action. It's a recognition of a nation state. I agree, but it is what it is. There are written rules, and then there is tradition. Since most new nation states of late have come from the Security Council actions like Kosovo or East Timor, then the Security Council gets to decide when it feels like things are done with them. We're a totally unique case. Kagi said, why aren't the memes working in Russia, China, and the U.S.? They aren't working in the U.S. because they've got memes too. They're not as good as us at it yet, but they can minimize the effect we have. The primary reason they're not working there, though, is because President Hamburger never gave a damn about the American people in the first place. Russia and China are democracies. Ferret might not have been taking a side, but he was certainly running the meeting. Helen said, then why aren't the memes working on their rulers? Ferret answered, because they have altered the because they have altered Nacroleptics on their advisory staffs now, countering any memes we produce. The larger nations' intelligence services have finally figured out some of the basic secrets of memetic warfare, but they're still far behind us in the U.S. I saw an opportunity here. My goal was to destroy Hler, wasn't it? And yet, here I was talking to the very people who ran the thing. By coming up with the worst possible vote and the worst possible plan, I could potentially doom them. And yet, as much as they disliked Hler's cavalier use of memetics, they weren't the problem. Memetics was the problem. Hler was just the worst offender. And if I could somehow magically wave a wand and make Hler disappear forever, memetics would still be around. No, I needed access to the meme generator machinery, or whatever it was, and that meant that Hler had to stick around a little while longer. Which begged the question, how did I solve this problem? The Tuvalu deal was too good to pass up for Hler's long-term interests. But pissing off the United States was never a good thing when it could be avoided. Pissing off the Russians, on the other hand, was never a bad thing. I had a slight idea. Are there any small things that the U.S. has been asking Hler to do? They all sat and seemed to think about that for a bit. Finally, Helen said, well, yes, actually, to a degree. The CIA and a few other U.S. intelligence agencies would love to have access to the information we have in our data havens. I refuse them for now, but I suppose... Ferret slammed his hand on the table. Absolutely not. This is not going to happen. They have threatened the integrity of this nation for far too long to give into something like that. I said, so it's a matter of principle? Ferret nodded. Principle and pragmatism. Half our citizens here are here because they're disaffected with the likes of the United States government. Really? What if I told you that high-level people in the U.S. government thought you had large amounts of inappropriate material in your data haven? Helen said, define inappropriate. I think you can imagine, I said, the kind of that no one really wants to be accused of having, the kind that isn't legal in any place you'd want to call civilized in the world. We make sure that kind of thing isn't in the data haven. Helen frowned. She did not look happy. How do you know? We've got some rather impressive monitoring software. Given everything else I've seen and heard about Hler, I'm inclined to believe you. But that doesn't necessarily change the fact that sometimes it isn't enough to be simply innocent, because if enough people believe you're guilty, they can make your life a living hell. Helen looked around the room, worried. Everyone looked back. If we just let governments go wandering through our data, it entirely defeats the point of having a data haven. It means that any government can simply accuse you of having inappropriate content locked up somewhere, and you have to provide them the keys to the kingdom, she said. I think you, pretty much, have the situation. Governments that are democracies represent large hordes of people that don't like having this kind of stuff on their computers or existing anywhere. To be honest, I'm inclined to agree with them. Ferret looked at me like I was insane. What? I think this stuff... Let me clarify. You believe that it is okay for the government to simply wander willy-nilly into anyone's data just because someone might be hiding something somewhere? I was about to say yes, but thought a moment. No, I suppose not. As evil as that stuff was, privacy made it reasonable to require a search warrant. To search, they had to have a reason to search there. No, of course not. Ferret looked visibly relieved. Apparently, I was not quite a heretic, but I could see that he was thinking. Next time we get a guy to sit in here with us, we might want to learn a little bit more about what he thinks to himself. Probably a good idea, Ferret. Ferret looked at me and said, "We're off the subject." Keggy said, "Way off target." Ferret said, "Please get back to the topic at hand." Topic at hand? This is the topic at hand. You're deadlocked. I'm telling you the best solution is some kind of third option that appeases the United States and the Chinese that still lets you take the Tuvalu deal. It doesn't really seem to be a question. Ferret said, "I think that is fine as long as we don't sacrifice our national sovereignty." I sighed. Sovereignty? That's really what this is about, isn't it? I mean, that's why we put Hler together in the first place. We wanted our own country where we made our own rules. I said, "If you don't agree to compromise on some things, you're never going to accomplish anything." Ferret said, "Compromise is fine, good in fact, but there are some things you don't compromise on." "Well, you can compromise on being willing to give the United States or China something they want, as long as it doesn't affect our sovereignty." "Well, all right then," I said, desperately thinking. "Why not use outright bribery then?" Abraham chuckled. "Bribery? Yeah, sure, why not? Pay the U.S. and China a huge chunk of money." Ferret said, "I think that, given the budget of both governments are significantly higher than the entire GNP of Hler, I find that extremely unlikely." I said, "Not necessarily. After all, individual politicians make up the component parts of state governments. Find the right one to bribe, and you can be happy." Ferret said, "We played that game for years. Of course we have pet politicians in Washington. Who doesn't? But things have become a lot harder for us these days, for obvious reasons." "Well, can't you just increase their bribes to a higher level than usual?" "We could, in theory. But we're being watched a lot more. That means that they're being watched a lot more, which is going to make them nervous." I nodded. "Sure, but surely there has to be some kind of bribe that won't look bad publicly? Some kind of donation to a school fund in the district of the right senator, for example?" Kiggy laughed. "If there's one thing you can learn about when you run a corporation, there isn't any news that can't be spun in a negative light if you try hard enough." Such optimistic people. This was the bright haven of tomorrow? Looked more of the same. I kept at it. "Look, I realize it's a long shot, but the Tuvalu deal could very well be the Louisiana Purchase for Hler. You get territory, space access, and a potential shot at greater legal legitimacy all in one blow." Ferret sighed. "So I guess you're voting in favor of the deal then, on condition that Hler can actually do something to blunt the potential danger of the U.S. and China. You sound like you're not enthusiastic about the idea." Ferret didn't say anything. "You didn't like it, did you? That's why you didn't vote against it? Then why didn't you vote against it?" Ferret said, "I recuse myself. There's a big difference." Helen said, "Can we get back to the subject at hand? Just what exactly are we going to do to appease them then?" Abraham said, "Just a moment. I want to know, Ferret. If you were against the Tuvalu idea, then why didn't you say something?" Gilligan just sat there smiling. I didn't like that smile, but to be honest, did I really like anyone in the room? Regardless, I said, "Maybe he was afraid of offending you. As far as how to appease the United States, maybe we can do some research." Gilligan suddenly stopped smiling. That was an odd thing. It wasn't so much the fact that a bad reaction to something I said was unusual, but the fact that he didn't seem to want anyone doing research into how to appease the United States government. I considered saying something, but decided against it. Ferret loved the idea of postponing the meeting. "Yes, I agree. We'll talk to Micronation and have him find out what we can. I suppose that we can reconvene a meeting in, say, 4 days? Helen said, "There are other items on the agenda that need to be addressed, and the Tuvalu people won't wait that long." I said, "Fine then. 24 hours? Surely they could wait that long." And the other items on the docket? Very well. We can examine those. The first thing. He stopped as Gilligan cleared his throat. What is it? Ferret asked. Gilligan pointed at me. All heads in the room turned and looked. What? I said. Ferret finally said, I think what Mr. Ororo is alluding to is the fact that we need you to leave. Actually, I thought I'd watch if you don't mind. Anything I could learn about the inner mechanisms of Hler could get me what I wanted. Helen looked at Abraham. I don't mind. She looked at Keggy, who shrugged. Gilligan said, I mind. These meetings are supposed to be confidential. I had, more or less, voted the way he wanted. You'd think he would be thrilled, of course. I said, of course, if you'll excuse me. Ferret was quick to follow up. Actually, Chester, why don't you go ahead and talk to Michael Onyx anyway? I'm sure you can think of what you need to tell him. What you don't know, he can access. We should be done here soon anyway, regardless. I nodded and stood. Sure, I laughed. As I slowly walked down the hall, I tried to hear any lingering comments that might have been made about me behind my back, but all I heard was the telltale click of the airlock as it closed behind me. I went home. I decided to catch up on some email. There was still no sign of Amberlove. I was about at a point where I was going to go up to Prow and get him to do something crazy to rescue her. There was a place in the world for insane, impossible, and stupid plans, and this was one of them. In the meantime, I was getting a lot of endorsement offers from numerous companies I'd never heard from. Some of them were almost embarrassing. I got emails threatening my life, asking me for money, or proposing marriage. Almost none of these things were from anyone I'd ever met before. I did get emails from people I barely knew or hadn't seen in years, few of which I'd really call friends. They tended to lean a little bit more in the direction of asking for money, though a small handful of endorsement deals or quasi-romantic overtures came from people I'd known. I'd send polite emails to the more sane communications telling them I'd get back to them later. I had been doing this for over 3 hours and still hadn't heard anything back from the Hler board. It was time to get a little bit more proactive on all this. There were national defense secrets, and the biggest secret of them all was the one I was primed to get access to, the reason I was still here. I called Michael Onyx. Michael answered, though he sounded rather annoyed and busy. His tone softened a bit when he saw it was me. What can I do for you, Chester? How's Kim? We're worried about her. Or we've been working with her. She's still pretty convinced you're a god to be worshipped and obeyed, but she does just fine the rest of the time. She even has a job in one of the more secure areas. What do you mean, the rest of the time? Michael Onyx hesitated. Any mention of your name? It seems we can't really undo this. We've tried. No one understands it. A tiny annoying voice in the back of my head said, what if she simply wants to be this way? Some people need something or someone to worship. Lots of people become gods to others. It doesn't mean anything about who that person really is. I ignored my impressions on the matter. I was not someone who wanted to be worshipped, and even if I found some pleasure from it, the circumstances that had brought Kim to such a state were totally unacceptable. I asked Michael, so what exactly are your long-term plans? Michael didn't say anything at this point. So you really don't have any, do you? We've run out of ideas, Chester. She seems fine for the most part. You can hardly keep her locked up forever, I said. We probably won't. We're making advances all the time, and sooner or later we'll get some kind of breakthrough. Is there any way I can see her? I didn't want to see her at all, but thinking of whoever Kim was before she got her mind fried would probably not want other people to become the way she was. I was willing to use that to learn more about the hidden areas if I have to. Didn't I just tell you? I know. I meant behind some kind of two-way mirror or something. It's not like I want to just go up and say hello. Yes, I think we could arrange that. Are you sure you want to? Well, if she's acting normal like you say she is, then it's a good thing. I mean, it means I can take at least some solace that she's more or less kind of fake recovering. I see what you mean. Sure, I'll start the gears rolling. Thanks, I appreciate it. I hung up the phone. Well, it might not be unlimited access to all of Hler's facilities, but it was a start. Once I had that taken care of, I did some quick research on the computer and asked Amberlove's sister. I called Amberlove's sister. All I got was the answering machine. I left a message asking her to call me and left it at that. I was taking a bit of a chance, but I owed Amberlove big time. About an hour later, Ferret came by the door. He looked pale. Something had frightened him badly. What is it? I asked. New problem. Big shocker. What is it this time? Your ex-wife. She's hooked up with some very powerful people. The same people you said were going to accuse us of allowing child exploiters to use our data haven. There are no longer any doubts about that fact. She has accused us right along with them. She says she has proof, and furthermore, she's implied rather thinly that, that isn't my ex-wife. Fine, then, ex-girlfriend. She was a one-night stand, and I didn't know I had until after the fact. Ferret looked at me funny, as if not believing the statement for some reason, and then shook his head, ignoring it. Whatever. The important thing is that she's implying, with only the most vague hints, that you might be doing something with your son that was... What? Well, what the hell are you going to do about it? She was going to pay for this. I didn't know how, but they were all going to pay. How could you defend against charges like that? All it took was somebody pointing the finger, and she had a very loud voice and a very big finger with which to point. What choice do we have? We have to give them access to the data. Helen isn't going to like that. Helen is only part of Hler. We can fight off a lot of things, but this isn't one of them. Something snapped inside of me. I couldn't say what it was, really, since I'd long thought I'd snapped the last time I really could, and that Prow had sent me over the edge into oblivion one too many times. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to give in to these people. Has the council voted on this? No, but I'm fairly certain they'll see it my way. This is too big. I don't think so. Do you know the saying about paying the Danegeld? No. Once you pay the Danegeld, always pay the Danegeld. What the heck is the Danegeld? It's a ransom. I answered. A ransom for what? Never mind. It isn't important. If you don't get the quote, I'd rather not have to explain it. What is more important is the fact that once you give in to this kind of thing, your independence is over. Let me put it this way. Do you think I'm guilty of this? No, but I still want to know what... How would you feel if someone accused you of something like this? She hasn't outright accused you. She just kind of hinted at it and let the media speculators fill in the blanks. Of course not, I said. If she actually said something, I could sue her. As it is, she's just kind of getting as much political leverage as she can. You can fight this. I don't think you understand, Chester. I don't want to fight this. I don't really like you, and neither does Darla. You've been a thorn in my side for a little too long, and as far as I'm concerned, this is a perfect chance to resolve that problem once and for all. His whole demeanor changed. His body didn't look panicked at all. He had a crooked little smile that implied he'd been making it seem like he was worried all along, but this was actually his master plan. Just when I was about to lay into him, especially since his behavior was borderline schizophrenic, in burst quiescence Prow. It was perfect timing, as usual. I have determined, he said in an unusual and extremely overconfident manner, that the source of our most recent troubles is Amberlove. Most importantly, she has sent us a coded message for help. I wanted to ignore him, but it was one of those rare occasions when somehow he had gotten things right that forced me to say, and what precisely gives you that idea? Because she has hidden a second meme within the first meme that she created. The first meme involved people hating Chester and Hler in general, but the second smaller meme was to get people interested in the same perfume that Amberlove initially sold at the counter she worked at. Only you, Darla, or I would know about that. And the guy who owned the department store and anybody else we told or anybody else he told? Maybe. But there is also the fact that this meme causes them to not only buy the perfume, but it makes them act in exactly the same way. Ferret looked at us, his face a paroxysm of emotions. Here was a man who became whatever he had to in order to meet the secret agenda that he kept locked away in his heart. He could sell anything to anyone, and yet here was the flaw in his character. When confronted with something totally outside of his plans, so far beyond the scope of his perceptions that he did not know what to do, he was thrown off balance. It was my firm belief that people like Ferret had no real true self to revert to besides their selfishness and pride. But aside from my presence and general mucking about of his original plan by refusing to be a patsy to, or albeit accidentally, this was not a threat to him from us. As such, his ugly nature did not rear his head, only confusion. Woe to Prow if he saw what I saw, though. I studiously looked at the moron to avoid catching the gaze of the monster. Prowl looked at Ferret. What are you going to do about it? Ferret said. Well, we're going to rescue her, of course. I'm in, I said. I could see Ferret had only said what he felt Prowl most wanted to hear. Given Prowl's expression, Ferret had read Prowl right. A rescue attempt was in no way sane, given the kinds of places I imagined she was locked up in. But in most ways, it was my fault she was there in the first place. I felt obliged to try and get her out. Given that Ferret still seemed to think that Prowl was vital to the future of Hler and its defense, it made sense that he pretended to do what Prowl wanted him to, but that didn't mean he'd actually give us any useful resources to find her. Prowl beamed. Excellent. I think we should start forming a planning committee later tonight to go over the details. Shouldn't we find her first? I asked. I'm relatively certain I know where she is, Prowl said confidently. The perfume thing again? Precisely, Watson. By examining the areas most affected by the secondary meme, we can triangulate her precise location. And I presume you've already done this? I said, ignoring the Watson comment. I have. She's in Colorado Springs. That's what I'd thought. I wondered how much I should tell them about my experiences with Colonel Salamander. On the one hand, I didn't want them to know that I'd been fraternizing with the enemy. On the other hand, I was the enemy, and I felt no obligation to give them information they didn't need to know. Finally, I decided to say something. I think I might know something about this, Ferret said. What do you know? The person who probably has her is Colonel Salamander. Amberlove and I were interacting with them the last time we saw her. Them? Prowl said. Interacting? Ferret said. It's complicated. They wanted me to help them, I shrugged. Help them spy on Hler, Ferret said this matter-of-factly. Potentially. I turned them down, I said innocently at Ferret. He wasn't buying it. Did you? Yes. Ferret leaned back. And you expect us to believe that? Prowl said, Who are they? I said, That's complicated. Prowl said, Define complicated. I mean, it's rather embarrassing. I sat down. Ferret said, Would you... Well, you'd better get this over with and tell us who these people are and what they want from Hler. Salamander calls them the Cult of Innocence. One of its leaders is Salamander's wife. Most of them don't really care about anything but themselves. When he tried to recruit me to help them, I checked them out. I didn't like what I saw, but I didn't know what to do about it. I went to Amberlove for help. We meme-zapped them, but a bit too well. I don't know exactly what happened, but they were not being nice to each other when we left. I decided discretion was the better part of valor and left. Amberlove didn't and wouldn't. She wanted to make sure that they were okay and went back. She probably got caught. There, honest, complete, and yet short. I left out unneeded details like fires or dogs. Prowl looked hurt. Why didn't you come to us for help? Because. Because why? Drop it, Ferret interrupted. What else do you know about this Colonel Salamander? Not much. Well, that's not entirely true. I downloaded the entire contents of his hard drive, but there isn't anything there that I think that Michael stuck his finger up a finger ordering silence as he speed-dialed Micronation. Michael, yes. We've got a problem. I need you to prep for an extraction on foreign soil in 24 hours. There's a critical mission data in Arthursson's room. No, I didn't. Don't call him your grace. Quit trying to be funny. Yes, I've got a warrant. I'm giving you one. For the moment, he looked furious, but then he looked at me. You're willing to give us the data we need, right? Of course, but then we've got his permission. Get his computer and any portable data storage units and bring them to ops for analysis. People to look at them. Hey! He hung up the phone, grinned, and said, What? You didn't have to do that. I could have just given you the files. What if you accidentally forgot something? I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea of you people just randomly pilfering through my stuff. At this point, Prowl said, What's the matter with you two? We're talking about saving Hler, and more importantly, we're talking about saving Amberlove. You do this all the time, particularly you, Chester. We start with something incredibly simple, like damsel in distress, and suddenly you want to turn it into some political commentary. What is complicated here? Amberlove is in trouble, and we need to help her. Hler is in trouble, and so we're going to save it. I am wrong sometimes. I admit that I can make mistakes. They weren't trying to invade my mind or control my thoughts, but this is exactly what people who have Amberlove under their thumb want to do right now. Can you imagine what it was they did to her to make her cooperate with them? We have to save her. So can we please stop talking and go do something? And before you go saying that we need to properly plan things, let me say that planning things out involves us sitting around a table, planning with facts and figures and tiny maps with squiggles on them directing you to avoid the bears. Planning is not sitting around whining about how much ennui you have and how much the world is out to get you. Planning actually involves planning without pleasantries, like who had what for breakfast and how much they want their orange juice with it. We're in serious trouble here, and you two can think and all you two can think of is yourselves. It sickens me. Excuse me, Quiescence, but what is your problem? Why are you defending yourselves? Why are you still standing there? Do I need to beat some sense into? Yes, I've lost bouts in prison, but I've lost a few bouts in prison, but let me tell you, I've made up for it since then. I have made sure I spent my time in the gym every day for 2 hours, working out such that if push comes to shove, I'm prepared for it. Now, either of you two think you slack-jawed yokels are going to come with me, or are you going to be in a world of pain? That wasn't a request, Chester. That was an order. I'm louder, and right now I'm more important, because I think I know what we need to do to get Amberlove out of there, which is why I have a plan, and the two of you have your issues, which could be resolved another time. Ferret tried saying something, but it was unintelligible as Prowl said, As I said, I'm louder than you and can make sure this conversation ends right now, so shut up and get moving. First I get loud, then I get painful. We have things to do and they need doing. Yes, I realize that I'm doing what the two of you did earlier, but I'm verbally trying to herd you from the ops room where we can meet with Micronation and do something more productive. Why aren't you moving? Why are you still standing there? Move, 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 damn it all. I left. It wasn't that I wanted to give Proud the satisfaction of being right. He wasn't, and I think he knew it, but he was succeeding in giving me a headache. That, and I saw the concealed pistol in Ferret's jacket pocket, and a glint in his eye that he was sorely tempted to use it. I was too worried that it might be next. In the next few minutes, all of us met in ops. Micronation briefed us all with the seriousness of the situation. Prow was right, as usual. The extra intel Arthurson provided us was the edge we need. The cult is deep. They have prime influence with Laura Boring, Vice President Boring's wife, and as well as the Senator Weasel, Senator Hedge Fund, and Senator Rasputin. They have all their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. The mechanisms of the cult are not directly important, because once we retrieve Amberlove, we're fairly sure that we won't be able to maintain their memetic assault. They won't be able to maintain their memetic assault against us. They're threatened. By what? I asked. Farron answered the question. He acted as if the scene with Prow had never occurred. Without the cult, most of their member organizations would do what they set out to do, which is defend children. As it is, they are able to use children to shame anyone they feel isn't properly conveying their message. Memes are a wild card because there isn't anyone to blackmail. Until they get their own Nacroleptics and hardware running, they're behind on their ability to influence the public, and that threatens their ability to exert power and influence. So that's the plan, I said. So what's the plan, I said. We rescue Amberlove, Micronation said. We rescue her and get her home. I'm going, of course. I'm taking 6 of my best men with me. You'll know 4 of them. 2 you won't. They're new, but I can vouch for them. You're coming as well, since you have the most familiarity with the cult's nature. Ferret looked shocked. You're not bringing Prow? Why would anyone bring a mentally unstable person on their super-secret mission? Micronation said, he's more valuable here. We can feed all our information back to Hler, and he can see it there. Besides, if we lost him, Chester, and Amberlove on this, we'd have a big problem. The surprise package requires a constant link to Hler anyway. What the heck was the surprise package? I wasn't sure what interested me more, that I was now considered a valuable asset to Hler or the surprise package. I also noticed that he didn't include the fact that capturing the head of Hler's security wouldn't be too good either. This was a whole new level of burning down pool houses, but I had friends this time who were far better at it than I was. They were professional pool house burn downers.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the secret commentary at the end of each chapter. Wow, this was a long one. Very long chapter. I think the first thing that sticks out to me about this one is there's a game that I used to enjoy playing in the 90s and early aughts that was from Steve Jackson's games called Illuminati. And the way it worked is each of you played a different secret conspiracy, like the New World Order, or the Bavarian Illuminati, or the UFOs, and each of you had a different objective, and you either through brute force or cunning take another card and slowly build out your little network around your center card. And this chapter feels like I'm playing that game with different conspiracies and adding them in crayon on a napkin. I've written narcoleptic meme mind control people. I mean, at the time I wrote it, I was deep in the novel, and so the sheer ridiculousness of an arms race with different governments collecting surgically altered narcoleptics to protect world leaders from memetics is insane. And it's not tongue-in-cheek insane like Grenade Man versus Zombies. This novel takes itself way too fucking seriously. If I ever do actually go back and rewrite my first, second, and fourth novel as that trilogy, gotta say, definitely gonna be parody, definitely gonna be fun and insane as all mind control or crazy government conspiracy stuff is. And man, you could tell the influence of the people that I hung out with, which was frankly a lot of libertarians who are good people, but well, the individuals are good people. I'm not speaking about politics in this particular commentary, but the particular people that I had in the gaming group when I was writing this thing were basically good people, but man, some of their ideas were just, yeah, suffice to say, I got older, I got wiser. The idea that, I mean, even in science fiction, that memetics could, I mean, look, telepathy, sure. Subliminal messages, sure. I might even have memetics as a science you could do, but, you know, surgically altering a narcoleptic to allow memetics, it's the entire novel works around some really good sci-fi that I did my research on, right? Quantum entanglement, still a thing. Drones, still a thing. Telepresence, still a thing. The memetic narcoleptic thing has not aged well, especially since I'm no longer romantically involved with a narcoleptic. In fact, it's basically shoehorned into the novel to the point that this novel, while not perfect, you know, if I really was drunk or had nothing better to do, could be salvageable for, you know, after 4 or 5 years worth of work, and burning it down and starting over again and burning it down and starting over again and burning it down and starting over again from scratch. And then writing another novel and deciding that not to write this novel and then maybe trying again to write this novel. I don't know. The point is, this novel has problems, which is why I'm making fun of it in this commentary. But the narcoleptic thing just does not work. But the problem is that literally the entire plot of the novel holds together for this thing. The narcoleptic thing is just ridiculous, and I always knew it was kind of over the top and wonky, but this chapter highlights just how completely stupid this novel is. I mean, it's not like Plan 9 from Outer Space stupid. It's just stupid. Like Speed 2 stupid. So my lesson for any would-be writers is don't write this kind of a novel, right? Put some thought into your overall plot. And if when you talk about a chapter summary to a complete stranger, they break out into fits of giggles because the president has to be guarded by a surgically altered narcoleptic to protect them from mean mind control, you're probably on the wrong track.